Nobody laughed when Coretta Webb walked into the Whitmore Chess Club that Tuesday evening. They didn't notice her at all. That's the thing about invisibility. It isn't always cruel. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's chosen. She came in through the side entrance, the one that opened near the storage closet where the folding tables were stacked. She wore a gray maintenance uniform, the kind with the embroidered logo of the building services company stitched above the left breast pocket. She carried a mop bucket on wheels, and the bucket made that familiar plastic scraping sound against the hardwood floor. That sound everyone in a room has learned to tune out, the way you tune out traffic or the hum of a refrigerator. No one looked up. There were 14 men in that room. Most of them were in their 30s and 40s, wearing fleece vests, and the kind of casual confidence that comes from years of being taken seriously. They sat at boards arranged in 2 rows, the evening light coming in flat through the long windows that overlooked St. Clair Avenue West. A few were mid-game. A few were watching others play. One was refilling his coffee from the carafe near the window and talking too loudly about Carlson's defensive errors at the last invitational. Coretta Webb, 53 years old, moved between them like water around stone. She wiped down the baseboards near the far wall. She emptied the waste bin by the entrance. She straightened the stack of score sheets on the side table without looking at them, even though anyone who had been watching closely, and no one was, would have noticed her eyes catch the position on the board nearest the door for just a fraction of a second. Just a fraction, and then she moved on. I want you to hold that image for a moment. A woman, quiet, doing her work, invisible to everyone in that room. Because what happened next, what happened over the following 3 weeks in that club on St. Clair, is the kind of story that makes you reconsider every person you've ever walked past without really seeing. The Whitmore Chess Club had been operating out of the 2nd floor of the Whitmore Community Center since 1987. It wasn't famous, it wasn't particularly prestigious, but it had a reputation among the people who cared about such things. Serious players, tournament regulars, the kind of men who kept physical scorebooks and could recite game annotations from memory. The president of the club was a man named Fletcher Dodd. Fletcher was 41, broad-shouldered with a square jaw and the particular manner of someone who had been the best at something in a small room for so long that he'd forgotten the room was small. He'd won the club championship 6 consecutive years. He had a rating, FIDE, not just CFC, that he mentioned within the first 10 minutes of meeting anyone new. He coached junior players on weekends, which he spoke about with the tone of someone performing community service rather than passing on a love of the game. He was not a bad man, exactly, but he was the kind of man who sorted people quickly, who scanned a room and assigned value, who had decided without ever articulating it that some people were players and some people were furniture. Coretta Webb was furniture. He walked past her that first Tuesday without acknowledgement. The second Tuesday, he asked her to be careful near the boards. These pieces are expensive. In the tone you use when you're not quite speaking to a person, just issuing instructions to the space around you. The third Tuesday, he didn't even do that. Coretta said nothing. She cleaned the board's edges with a dry cloth after the players left. She stacked the chairs. She turned off the lights. What Fletcher Dodd did not know, what none of them knew, was that Coretta Webb had once sat on the other side of a board from a grandmaster in Lyon, France, and made him work for 47 moves before he finally found the line that ended it. She was 24 then. The grandmaster had shaken her hand afterward and said, in accented English, "You play like someone who has already lost everything and has nothing left to fear." She hadn't known what to make of that at the time. She did now. She had grown up in Halifax, the youngest of 4, in a house where money was careful and chess was free. Her father had learned the game from a merchant sailor and taught it to his children the way other fathers taught fishing. Patiently, with long silences, letting you figure things out. Coretta had taken to it differently than her siblings. For them it was a game. For her it became a language. She played through high school, through Dalhousie, through the years when she was working 2 jobs, and her rating was climbing in ways that made people at tournaments look at her registration form twice, then look at her, Then look at the form again. She stopped competing at 38. Her mother had gotten sick, and then her mother had died, and then the grief had done something to her relationship with the game. Not ended it, but changed it, made it interior, private. She kept a board at home. She solved problems at night, sometimes for hours, the way other people watched television. She had moved to Toronto 6 years ago, when her daughter took a job at Mount Sinai. She had taken the maintenance position at the Whitmore Center because it paid reliably, and because the hours suited her. She had not told anyone there about her history with chess. She had no particular reason to, until Fletcher Dodd opened his mouth on a Wednesday evening in late October. It had been an accident that she was there at all. She'd come in an hour early that week because the floor in the main hall needed stripping before Thursday's community dinner. She'd done the hall, worked her way down the corridor, and ended up near the open door of the chess room, where a small group had gathered for what she would later understand was an informal practice session. Not a regular meeting night, just 5 or 6 of the regulars who had nowhere better to be. Fletcher was in the middle of demonstrating something at one of the boards. A young guy, maybe 25, sat across from him looking like a student being gently corrected. 2 others watched from nearby chairs. A man named Conrad, tall, loud, always talking, stood at Fletcher's shoulder, nodding. Coretta slowed in the hallway. Not stopped, slowed. Because the position on the board was interesting. She could see it from the door, just the edge of it, and what she saw was a middle-game structure she recognized, a particular pawn configuration that had a trap in it, a trap that was 3 moves deep and not obvious. Fletcher was explaining the wrong line. Not badly wrong, not embarrassingly wrong, but wrong in the way that mattered in a close game, wrong in the way that would cost you eventually. She knew because she had played that exact position, or near enough, in a tournament in Montreal in 2003, and she had found the right line at move 22, and it had taken her opponent completely apart. She didn't mean to react, but something in her face must have shifted, some almost imperceptible thing, because Conrad looked up and saw her in the doorway. "Can we help you?" he said. Not unkind, exactly. Just the tone of someone asking a question that really means, "Why are you here?" "Sorry," Coretta said. "I'll move on. You need something in here?" "No, she started to step back. Were you watching?" Fletcher said. He'd turned around now. He was looking at her the way a person looks at something that has stepped outside its expected context. A mop in the kitchen, a squirrel on the fire escape. "Do you play?" The room had gotten quiet. Not hostile. Just the quiet of people whose attention has been briefly redirected. Coretta looked at him. She thought about saying no. It would have been easier. It would have been the sensible thing, the practical thing, the thing that let her finish her shift and go home to her board and her evening tea. Instead, she said, "A little." Something moved across Fletcher's face, something quick and not entirely pleasant. He looked at Conrad. Conrad looked back. The young man at the board glanced between them. "A little," Fletcher repeated. He pulled out the chair across from where he was standing and gestured at it with a kind of courtly mock deference. "Well, why don't you show us?" Coretta set her mop against the wall in the hallway. She walked into the room. She sat down. She told herself it would be a short game. She would play conservatively, lose respectably, and that would be that. No disruption, no scene. She had not come here to prove anything to anyone. Then Fletcher made his first move, and she saw, within 4 moves, that he was setting up the same wrong line she'd seen him explain. The trap was already beginning to take shape. And something in her, something she'd kept very quiet for a very long time, recognized it. She decided to let it breathe. What happened over the next 31 moves was not a demolition. That's important to understand. Coretta did not play the way someone plays when they want to humiliate. She played the way someone plays when they are genuinely interested in the game. Careful, patient, responsive, present. She made it close enough that Fletcher never quite felt the ground shifting under him, until move 29. At move 29, she played ND5. It was quiet, no fireworks, just a knight moving to a square in the center of the board. Fletcher stared at it for nearly 3 minutes, because what he was seeing, if he was seeing it clearly, was that the game was already over. Not immediately. not on the next move. But the structure of what was coming was already inevitable, already locked in, the way a horizon is locked in. You might walk toward it for a long time, but it was never going to get any closer. He looked up at her. Coretta was looking at the board. "Where did you?" He started. She glanced up. Her expression was neutral. He looked back at the board. He played RC1. She responded without hesitation. He played Key 2. She thought for a moment, genuinely thought, not performed thought, and then responded again. On move 31, he tipped his king. The room was very quiet. Conrad was leaning forward now with his arms on his knees. The young man had turned entirely in his chair to face the board. The other two were standing closer than they had been before, without seeming to have moved. "Play it out," Conrad said quietly. "Not to anyone in particular." "There's nothing to play," Fletcher said. He was still looking at the board. His voice was even. "It's done." He looked at Coretta. "Who taught you?" he said. "My father. And after your father." She was quiet for a moment. "In tournaments." "Where?" "Halifax, Montreal, a few other places." "What's your rating?" she told him. Not the current rating. She wasn't registered anywhere active, but her peak, the number she'd carried at 36 before she stopped competing. Fletcher Dodd sat back in his chair. That number was higher than his, meaningfully higher. The kind of gap that in chess represents not a slight difference in skill, but a difference in the category of player you are. He was quiet for a long moment. "You've been cleaning this room," he said. "For how long?" "About 8 months, Coretta said. He didn't say anything to that. No one did. "Here's what I want to tell you, because it would be easy to end the story there. The moment of reveal, the room going quiet." Fletcher Dodd humbled. "That's the satisfying version. The clean one. But what happened in the weeks after that is actually the part that matters." Fletcher did not immediately become gracious. People rarely do. He was awkward around her at first, overcorrecting, deferential in a way that was almost as uncomfortable as the dismissiveness had been. He introduced her to the members the following Tuesday with a formality that was slightly desperate, as if the introduction could retroactively cover the 8 months of looking through her. Coretta handled it with the same steadiness she brought to everything. She didn't come to the club meetings regularly. She wasn't a member. But once or twice, on evenings when she was finishing up and the room was winding down, she would sit across from one of the regulars and play a game. She never announced herself. She never explained her history unless someone asked. When they asked, she answered briefly and then returned her attention to the board. The young player, his name was Owen Price, 24, and very good, and still in that stage where he knew enough to know how much he didn't know, started asking her questions about positions, about lines, about the way she thought through the middle game. She answered him honestly, the way her father had answered her, with patience and long silences, and the assumption that he was capable of understanding. Owen later told someone that those conversations changed how he thought about the game entirely, that she'd shown him something about patience he'd never gotten from any coach or book. He ended up placing third in the Ontario Junior Invitational that spring. He sent her a text message afterward. She replied with 2 words, "Well earned." As for Fletcher Dodd, he asked her, one evening in late November, if she would consider helping him coach the junior group. Not formally, not with any title or compensation, at least not at first. He said it carefully, and she could hear in the careful way he said it that this was not easy for him, that he was asking more than he appeared to be asking. She thought about it. "I'll sit in once," she said. "We'll see." She sat in 3 times. The third time, one of the 12-year-olds, a girl named Anaya Quick, very stubborn in a way that reminded Coretta of herself, asked her a question about sacrificial play that Coretta answered for 45 minutes straight, barely noticing the time. Anaya looked at her at the end of it and said, "You're really good." Coretta laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised out of her. "Thank you," she said. "Do you teach?" Coretta thought about that for a moment. "I might start," she said. "There is a particular kind of courage that does not announce itself. It doesn't raise its hand or stand up tall or make sure everyone in the room has noticed. It just goes on existing. It shows up on Tuesday evenings with a mop bucket and does the work, and it carries everything it knows quietly, And it doesn't ask anyone for permission to be exactly what it is. Coretta Webb had spent 15 years being that kind of courage, being it so consistently, so naturally, that she'd almost stopped thinking of it as courage at all. It had just become the shape of her life. What Fletcher Dodd gave her, accidentally, thoughtlessly, in that moment when he pulled out that chair with his courtly mock deference, was a door, one she hadn't known she'd been waiting to open. She walked through it at her own pace. That's the part no one talks about when they tell these stories. They talk about the reveal of watching arrogance meet its correction. Saksh. And those things are real. They matter. There is something genuinely important about the moment a room goes quiet because it has underestimated someone. But the more important thing is what comes after. Whether the person who was underestimated gets to decide what the revelation means, whether they get to choose what door they walk through and how fast and on whose terms. Coretta chose. She's still at the Whitmore Center. She still does the building services work. She likes it, genuinely, the physical rhythm of it, the clarity of a clean floor. She also runs a Thursday evening session for junior players now, officially, with a small honorarium and her name on the community center bulletin board. 8 months ago, nobody in that room could have told you her name. Now the kids argue about who gets the chair closest to hers. I've been thinking about Fletcher Dodd's face in that moment when she told him her rating. That particular stillness. Because I don't think it was only embarrassment, though there was plenty of that. I think it was something older and harder, the recognition that he had looked at a person and seen a category, and that the category had cost him something, and that the cost was not just strategic. We do this, all of us. We look at the uniform, and we stop seeing the person wearing it. We hear the accent, and we hear it instead of what's being said. We see someone pushing a mop, and we think we know the full story. And we are so rarely paying enough attention to notice how wrong we are. Coretta Webb was never obligated to prove anything. She walked through that door because she chose to. Because something in her still loved the game enough to let it breathe, just for a moment, in a room full of people who hadn't thought to wonder what she knew. That's what silent confidence looks like. Not performance, not revenge, just the patient knowledge that what you carry is real, whether or not anyone in the room has figured that out yet. So here's what I'm asking you to sit with today. Is there someone in your life you've looked past? Someone you've sorted into a category before you really knew them? And is there something you've been carrying quietly, some skill, some knowledge, some part of yourself, that you haven't let breathe in a long time? Because the door is still there. It's always still there. If Coretta's story landed with you, leave it in the comments. Tell me about a time someone underestimated you, or a time you caught yourself underestimating someone else. Those are the stories I want to read. Subscribe to Harmon Tales if you're new here, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. We'll see you next time.